Trump barely squeaked into the presidency, not even getting 50% of the popular vote, and he's been doing horribly ever since. And I don't mean that he's doing horribly just from the perspective of a progressive like me, but even if you're MAGA, like he's been kind of actively screwing you over in a number of different ways. I don't just mean like willfully wrecking your 401ks with his boneheaded trade policy. I mean like starting a war when he swore he wouldn't and threatening to start many others and entering into this strange submissive relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu, which definitely makes America second at best. And of course, the biggest one, actively covering up the Jeffrey Epstein scandal for fairly and increasingly obvious reasons. So the question remains, after all of that, has it taken its toll on him? And it has, but not unfortunately really among MAGA, because if you take a look at the most recent Gallup tracking poll, this goes to the very beginning of his second term up to present, and he has lost 2% of Republican voters. 2%. Now, it's possible that some people that had been Republican were so disgusted by his handling of the Epstein case that they no longer identify that way. I guess that's possible, but I don't know. The only actual evidence we have is that he's lost 2%. Now, he has lost a lot of other people. The 6% of Democrats that approved of him, which was always strange, that's now down to 1%. He has lost literally exactly 1 out of every 2 independents that approved of him when he was inaugurated, from 46% down to 23, and overall he's dropped from 47 down to 37. So he is, by every other metric than MAGA support, very and increasingly unpopular. So that's not great news. But I just want to focus on one thing. Like, some people may do, I don't know if it's really copium, but like you see him only losing 2% of MAGA, and you might think, well, we are a wildly partisan country. That's just who we are. And it's easy for us to hate the other side. It's really hard for us to understand when our side is failing. But I don't think that's actually what it is in this case. He lost 2%, but when you look at Joe Biden's approval rating amongst Democrats over his term, let's bring that up. Over the 4 years, he lost 25 points of Democrats, but he lost most of that in less than the first year. Democrats seem to be perfectly capable of losing approval for somebody who's not measuring up. And I would argue that as many problems as I had of Joe Biden, I don't think he failed as willfully and constantly as Donald Trump. And yet we were able to see that. We were able to update our views based on reality and changing circumstances. But MAGA just doesn't seem capable of that. Now, we have other polling, some good, some bad. Brett, what do you make of that so far?
I mean, that's the margins. Like right now, I think in the wake of the 2024 election, there were a lot of people trying to figure out what exactly happened, and the dust has settled at least a little bit. And now we're starting to see, in the wake of that, I guess the big question was like, can anything have an effect on Trump's support, no matter what? And we all knew that a 2% fall among partisan Republicans that would be huge. It would be impossible, right? Mm-hmm. And then the independents, what you really have to watch. And it's tough to find out exactly what thing appeals to them. And one thing that I really am learning from being here at Netroots with a lot of progressive organizers is there's a lot of different definitions that people have when they say the word MAGA. And each different definition creates a front in the fight to kind of regain control. And everybody needs to be fighting on all those fronts. And I think that the front that has been most successful is actually just, there's a bunch of people that supported Trump because of Epstein type stuff, anything else that would be in that word cloud. And he was lying in a new way that you hadn't heard before from politicians. And you really hated the way that the most conventional politicians were, in your opinion, lying to you. And right now, it seemed like the easiest thing possible would be for that dude to just release the Epstein files, because that was the thing. He's released the JFK files, the MLK files, all the K files, but he hasn't released the Epstein files. And I think that, plus just like this uncertainty around the economy with the tariffs, it's a more difficult thing to understand. But I think those two things working together, plus like just a lot of bros who were looking at the way that immigration is being carried out. They thought it was like, okay, you sold me on this. There's rapists, there's murderers that are overstaying their visas. Why are you raiding a Home Depot?
Yeah.
That sounds horrible. It looks horrible because of people like us and all the folks here at Netroots. Folks actually get to see how horrible it is. And there you have it. Plus the war, which you were talking about.
Yeah, definitely. One other poll that I want to mention is the most recent Economist YouGov poll gave us an updated idea of what Black Americans think of Donald Trump. Remember, that was one of the big stories of the election, was he is wildly popular, most popular president ever amongst Black Americans or whatever, which in the vote didn't end up working out. But he is now at 11% approval, 84% disapproval. He's at negative 73. So maybe we could stop with that whole thing. It didn't really like that. I mean, he did see he's more popular amongst the Latino voters if they want to claim that, especially amongst Latino men. You can claim that, but this other thing, like, that was never really true, and now it just seems ridiculous. But that said, why don't we move on to the guy who might, it looks like, replace him, starting with this. You can just go right into it if you want.
Look, this is early polling, but look, for the GOP nomination, it's J.D. Vance at 40%. There's no one even close to him. Ron DeSantis back at single digits at 8%. Donald Trump Jr. back at 7%. And I know Kate Baldwin will say, Harry, it's so early. It's too early to look at the polling.
You said it. You don't even need me to say it.
I said it, quoting you. I was channeling you. But keep in mind that early favorites have actually gone on to win the nomination 63% of the time. Those who have run since 1980. And when you're dealing with fields that are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, upwards of north of 20, and all of a sudden you're telling me that the early poll leader, who is J.D. Vance, that those win more than 50% of the time? That is why I say it looks pretty gosh darn good, or pretty good.
Couple things coming out of that. First of all, they're adorable together. Second of all, 1980 is the literal weirdest way to say that year. And third, not a bad Larry David, honestly, from Harry Enton there. But that polling is interesting. I don't know how surprising it is. I mean, he is the VP. So like, he's the one that everybody knows. It is maybe a little bit surprising that Trump Jr. isn't doing better, considering how little anything seems to matter on the right other than just name recognition and the perception that Donald Trump likes you. Actually, maybe that's the thing that's hurting Don Jr. a little bit. Maybe they don't think that Trump supports him enough. I don't know. But that's J.D. Vance, who's currently leading in all of these polls. I sort of doubt that once the actual primary happens, if it happens, that he's going to do all that well. I think that he's a really oily guy. I don't think he's a great candidate, but we'll see. In the meantime, though, he could face a challenge from Steve Bannon, of all people, who apparently doesn't think that J.D. Vance is tough enough and is now talking to people about how he himself is going to run for president. Yes, J.D. Vance, not tough enough. And so this comes after Donald Trump sort of very begrudgingly was like, I guess it'll be J.D. Vance, saying in all fairness, he's the vice president. Not exactly a massive vote of confidence. But sources close to Bannon say that he's badmouthed Vance in private, claiming credit for helping nail down his MAGA identity during the Ohio Senate primaries. And one source claimed Bannon had also pushed and propped Vance up for the role of VP, essentially creating his image. Whereas Bannon says, I don't think like a politician. All I do is back President Trump and try to move the populist agenda and the America First agenda. At that point, he'd said the idea of him running was too absurd, but multiple sources are saying he's talking it up behind the scenes. I think the idea of Steve Bannon, like him as the actual candidate in the general election, he is a grotesque figure. I mean that in every way, especially physically. I just don't see how that would possibly work, Brett. But what do you make of these two options?
I don't see him running, but if he does, my Lord. The problem is there's this perception of authenticity problem that folks have. And the war starts to like take shape. The thing is, no one knows J.D. Vance. No one knows who he is. He and Trump are people who are in their position because of the entertainment industry. Which is a great skill to have. And Vance just doesn't have the baggage of having stood on a debate stage and lost to Donald Trump. I think people that like Trump you see a 40%, they like Trump, they like Vance because he's the vice president, and they haven't really been paying enough attention to see all the ways in which potentially they could perceive J.D. Vance to not be 100% in lockstep with Trump. Like there was some military intervention issues that Vance surfaced in some unearthed leaked tapes. But other than that, like DeSantis really represents the opposite of Trump in all ways, and he's a loser is the problem. And then with Bannon, it's like you have your fear. Like, am I giving power to my worst fears by them being my worst fears? One of my most terrifying images, if not worst fears, is Bannon doing well. He's in charge of finding ways to say things that appeal to this particular subset of the Republican Party. He's an expert at it. He's probably the one who, along with Tucker Carlson, best understands this populist grunt that they have. And so I don't know if he has what it takes. But generally, I'm with Kate Baldwin, not only because she's my turbo crush, but also because it is super duper early. They're essentially asking, whose name do you know and not hate?
Yeah. That's generally what this stands for, and that says that doesn't mean that he won't be the person. You have to start going over other ones in your mind, but there are other ones. He could be Brian Kemp or something. There are a lot of governors. They've got a number of them, and the thing is people are well, I guess he's the most MAGA or whatever, but Barron or that Steve Bannon is maybe he's fundamentally more MAGA, but remember, Trump has survived, for better or worse. And it's the latter, he's survived. But a lot of people running like him have not won. Even in red states, they've lost, because I don't think that identity is actually popular amongst independents. I just don't think it is. And so running on that same thing, I don't know that works on a national level for anyone other than Donald Trump. Perhaps we'll see, perhaps in the form of Tucker Carlson or JD Vance or Steve Bannon or whatever, but I don't think that it's a lock that just the most MAGA person naturally inherits all of Trump's vote, and that actually forms a bigger, actually winning majority coalition.
Yeah, I see Steve Bannon looking at JD Vance, tying him to Peter Thiel and Palantir, depending on how that escalates, and throwing him on a railroad track somewhere and seeing if something runs him over.
Yeah, maybe metaphorically.